Hey! Today we are going to learn a little bit about basic shelter building. So, when you're out and about, there's a lot of ways that you could accidentally get lost, and it's important to know how to build a shelter in case you end up being out later than you need to be. There's a couple things that you can do to protect yourself from getting lost. So one of the first things is to always go with a buddy, as well as tell other people where you are going and when to be expected back. Stay on the trails and always just kind of pay attention where you are, because sometimes you might think something is part of a trail, but it might just be a deer trail. So kind of walk yourself back to where the main trail is and stay calm. Take a couple deep breaths and really think about where you are before continuing to kind of wander around. So let's say that something happens and you find yourself needing to make a shelter overnight. So a couple things to kind of pay attention to. So first, make sure that you're in a location that is good for a shelter. So if you have a lot of wind, make sure you're someplace that will break the wind, and make sure that if you're using trees, you're looking up to make sure there's no deadfall that might get you in the middle of the night. If you are near a trail, try to make your shelter close to the trail but not directly on top of it, because a lot of times wild animals like to use the trails at night because they're the easiest way to get places, especially if the trail is going close to water. You don't want bears or coyotes kind of taking their little wood highways and having to deal with them in the middle of the night. It's no fun. If you are close to water and building your shelter, make sure that you're not too close to water, because sometimes the river will rise and you don't want to end up swimming in the middle of the night. So make sure that you're staying about 10 feet off of the bank, so where like the high level mark is, just in case there might be some sort of storm upstream that you might get a whole bunch of water from. If you happen to be in the desert, also avoid low areas or places that might usually be rivers, because if there is a storm somewhere else, that water is going to rush up and flood really, really quickly. So stay away from those. Okay, so I've got my spot picked out. So I've got a lot of nice fluffy pine needles around me. I've got a lot of good branches and stuff like that that I can use to build my shelter. But today we're mostly going to focus on shelter building using a tarp and some twine. So if you have that, go ahead and join along, or watch the video now and try it later. Okay, so I have my spot picked out, and when you go hiking, you should always take some sort of emergency kit with you. So this has my first aid kit in it. It also has a couple different emergency shelter pieces that I can use. So some of you might have seen these. This is an emergency bivvy. So it just pulls out and you've got kind of like a small tarp that you can use. So you could use this to build your shelter. These are pretty widespread. These are the good old survival blankets. You could use that to make a shelter. Or I always carry around some trash bags. So you could use these to help make a shelter. You can use these to help make a shelter, or these are really helpful if you need to move some stuff or make a nice pile of pine needles so you have a nice comfy place to sleep. You can also just use a blue tarp. So if this is what you have at your house, that is awesome. Whatever you have works. Okay. Now that we have our supplies, let's just talk a little bit about how big to make your shelter. So it might sound really, really cool to make some big, giant, grandiose shelter, but in reality, if you are lost in the woods, you need to conserve your energy. And a smaller shelter is better because it will keep you warm or sheltered a little bit better for the rain, and it won't take as much energy to build. So I want my shelter to be about as big as I am laying down. So I've already started gathering some pine needles to make my little pine bed. It's about my size, so I'm ready to kind of put up my tarp. So tarps are a really good thing to use, especially if it's hot out. So it does allow some air circulation. You are protected. It gives you some shade as well as some rain protection. So that's what we're gonna do. So I've got my two trees. They don't have really any deadfall that I'm super worried about. And then I've got my twine. So in previous weeks, we've talked about some knots. So you can use whatever knots you feel comfortable with to tie these to the trees. So you can use a bowline, you can use a clothes hitch, whatever you know works. So as you can see, I have tied my string together, and it couldn't quite reach, so I just grabbed a different string, and then I just tied a square knot right here to connect them together. So I have my tarp, and all I'm going to do as it starts getting windy out is throw it over our line. And then you can either use some sticks or some rocks on all the corners and in the middle as well to help hold things down. And this is really the simplest kind of shelter to make using the tarp. So I would just do that on both sides, and I have a tiny little shelter that I could hide in. If you don't have rocks around, you can also use some sticks that are kind of strong. Yeah, let's get a good stick. And kind of make your own tent stake. So you could kind of just put it through there and work it into the ground to hold it down. Okay, so my tarp shelter is all done. I've got my nice pine bed of leaves. It's actually pretty cozy in here, but there's another way you can build this as well to kind of avoid this could get kind of itchy or scratchy in the middle of the night. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of tilt this over so that we use one side of the tarp to cover an ear. Another way to build a shelter is super easy. It's going to be more of an L shape, kind of a lean-to. So on the ground, I already have some rocks laid out just to kind of help the tarp keep shape while I fold it up. So half of it is kind of X'd off, or the edges are edged off with the rocks. And I'm just going to pull the tarp up, string some of my string through the holes on the edge. And if you don't have a hole in the edge of the tarp, you can either kind of ball it up and twist it around, get a rock, a small rock, this is a little bit big, and kind of tie around that rock so it holds up, or just something so that your tarp doesn't fall off when you're sleeping. And I'm just going to do a half hitch or two. You can also tie a bowl in, but I feel like most people know how to do the half hitch, so we'll do easier. And then I'm going to come over here, do the same thing. Do my little half hitch. Okay, so we've got that up, and you can see it's a little kind of soggy still. So I want to pull this back just a little bit so that there's a little bit of an overhang. You're getting more of that tent shape instead of it just being like straight up and down. Oh, my hair. And you can push it back a little bit more. Again, the rocks are just here to make sure that it doesn't fly away. But you can see I've got this nice sheltery part. I can push that back farther to make more of a overhang. I could take this up a little bit higher to make an overhang. But now I've got a nice spot to kind of hang out and chill and wait for help. So those were two super simple ways to build a shelter using tarps or trash bags or some sort of plasticky thing that you have on you. I just want to reiterate again that it's really important to make sure that people know where you're going and when to expect you home, as well as to always take a buddy or a couple buddies with you, and know the route around the trail. It's usually smaller trips that end up with people getting lost, or those the bigger kind of adventure trips. So always keep that in mind. Weird things can happen on the trail, where you're out in the backcountry and you're not close to an ambulance or roads, so it takes a lot longer to get out. So it could just be someone slipped in, rolled their ankle, and that might be the reason why you're out overnight. So just keep that in mind, and practice making some of your shelters. I'd love to see what you made in our comments.